Rowan Harrington had always been an unorthodox scientist. She devoted her life to probing the boundaries of consciousness, driven by the unsolved disappearance of her mother years ago. Her mother's journals were filled with bizarre descriptions of endless staircases, shifting corridors, and ghostly lights, an otherworldly panorama that circled around something called the Dream City. Rowan believed the key lay in lucid dreaming, that mysterious boundary zone where mind and sleep mingled. By compressing sleep cycles and increasing brainwave stimulation, she hoped to reach the deeper levels her mother had hinted at. Though her colleagues warned her about the mounting dangers of exhaustion and hallucination, she pushed on. Every night, her trembling hands set up experiment after experiment, ignoring hunger pangs and pounding headaches. The moment she finally slipped into unconsciousness, her only thought was to find that city, no matter the cost. Her makeshift laboratory became a shrine to insomnia. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead at all hours, illuminating a mishmash of EEG equipment, half-empty coffee cups, and Carter, a dedicated graduate student, who admired her genius but worried for her well-being. The lab's whiteboards were covered in scrawls and diagrams that made less sense with each passing day. Fractal patterns describing REM cycles, cryptic symbols from her mother's journals, and new formulas linking consciousness to quantum theories. Sleeplessness buzzed beneath her skin. She wondered which reality she inhabited at any given moment. When she finally clicked on her device to monitor her brainwaves at the start of a session, her heart raced with a mixture of dread and exhilaration. Too often, she could no longer recall if she was awake or dreaming. But obsession drowned caution as she reached for her mother's photograph. On the night it happened, Rowan's entire body thrummed with sleepless energy. She slipped the electrodes onto her scalp and let the droning hum of the ventilation system lull her toward slumber. Almost immediately, she felt a sharp twist in perception, the lab's walls dissolving behind her closed lids. She stood in a dark expanse, the ground pulsing like a living thing underfoot. The air tasted metallic, and overhead, a sky roiled with swirling phosphorescent clouds. At first, there was only silence. Then structures emerged, forming a sprawling city that defied geometry, its angles twisting in ways that made her head spin. Symbols that matched her mother's diaries glowed on the archways of alien buildings. The city felt both ancient and in flux, as if it pulsed in time with Rowan's own heart. She explored cautiously, passing buildings whose warped windows distorted the starlight. Sometimes, the city shifted around her, rearranging its labyrinth of alleys without warning. She caught fleeting shapes darting across her peripheral vision, thin silhouettes that vanished whenever she looked directly at them. The phenomenon electrified her, fueling her need to document everything. Though she recognized this as a dream, the tactile reality of the place was jarring, the sharp tang of the air, the shadowy cobblestones beneath her shoes. She ran her fingers along a wall etched with glowing sigils, each swirl corresponding to a half-formed thought in her mind. Somehow she sensed a presence, a faint murmur in the back of her consciousness. But instead of fear, what spurred her forward was that lingering hope of unearthing what had driven her mother into these depths. Days bled into nights without distinction. Carter's concern grew as Rowan refused to rest. He pleaded that she take a break, that her spiraling insomnia was wrecking her mind. She would wave him off, muttering about being too close to a revelation. Indeed, each new dream delving thrust her closer to a visionary threshold. One night she discovered a colossal archway at the city's center, marked with intricate glyphs resembling swirling galaxies. A static charge tingled up her arm when she touched the stone, and a warped hum resonated in her ears. She felt drawn beyond it by an impossible gravity. Though terror welled up in her chest, she also sensed she might be on the verge of unlocking the dimension from her mother's notes. Then, just as her dream self reached out to pass through, she snapped awake in the lab, gasping and torn by frustration. Fearing she might lose the fleeting impressions, Rowan dictated her experiences into an audio recorder. She described the city's layout, the archway's texture, the radiant glyphs. Her voice trembled when she recalled the pulsing presence that seemed just beyond her line of sight. Carter listened to these recordings in hushed alarm, especially when she mentioned that her mother's diaries described a similar archway. "This is more than a dream," she declared one morning, dark circles under her eyes. "It's a real place, or at least some part of it is real. My mother found it too." Something took her. She refused to consider that it might have driven her mother to madness and disappearance. There had to be meaning, a hidden frontier that bound them together. The more Carter saw that fierce glimmer in her eyes, the more his own fear grew, convinced they were tampering with forces they didn't understand. Her next expedition was fueled by dangerous quantities of stimulants. She strapped herself into a reclined cot, hooking IV drips to keep her body from collapsing, while a potent sedative cocktail guided her mind into lucid calm. Carter hovered outside the glass window, monitoring her vitals. Heart pounding, Rowan felt the laboratory fade around her. This time she didn't have to wander the city's streets. She was already at the archway. The glyphs rippled like living snakes across the stone, each symbol pulsing in sync with her heartbeat. A single step brought her before a swirling darkness that churned inside the arch. She sensed it was more than a vision, some gateway that bridged that dream realm to another dimension. Gathering her courage, she drifted forward, passing through the vortex and feeling her stomach lurch as if she'd crossed the edge of reality. She emerged in a shifting void, thick with inky shadows. Strange shapes flickered in the distance, half-formed structures dissolving and reforming with each breath. An overwhelming dread seized her. The air itself thrummed with bass vibrations, so deep they rattled her bones. Then, out of the murk, a towering silhouette took form, a being of elongated limbs and swirling eyes. Its presence radiated cold intelligence. Rowan trembled, trying to speak, but no sound escaped her dry throat. The creature moved without moving, its body folding in on itself, each twist revealing more eyes and mouths. She couldn't tear her gaze away. Then it reached out and brushed her consciousness in a single searing flash. Images flooded her mind, cascading astral vistas, star fields erupting into cosmic storms, and within one swirl of darkness, she glimpsed her mother's pale face, contorted by terror. The shock made her wrench herself awake. She awoke with a ragged scream, the lab lights flickering overhead. Carter was by her side, eyes wide. Her pulse hammered dangerously, and sweat drenched her. For a moment she saw shifting shapes at the edges of the lab, too many eyes blinking from the corners. She shook her head, blinking until the figures vanished, no longer safe, not even in waking reality. "I saw her," she whispered, voice trembling. "She's trapped there, somewhere in that darkness." Carter urged her to stop, to see a doctor, but her resolve was unshakable. She felt that if she abandoned this threshold, she'd lose any chance to rescue her mother's fragmented consciousness. Worst of all, she sensed that crossing the portal had weakened the barrier between worlds. Electrical malfunctions kept plaguing the lab. Equipment short-circuiting, monitors spewing strange static. Sometimes the lights dimmed on their own, as though an unseen presence drifted nearby. Unable to bear the half-measure approach any longer, Rowan devised a final, all-in experiment. She sealed herself in the lab's inner chamber, prepared intravenous nutrients, and set the sedation levels so her body would remain stable in extended deep sleep sedation. Carter frantically protested outside the locked door, but she barely heard him. Exhaustion weighed on her, and she knew that when she next opened her eyes, it would be within the dream. Her last lucid act was to strap the monitoring electrodes across her forehead, ensuring Carter could track her vitals. Then darkness washed over her. She hurtled downward deeper and deeper, until she felt the weightless sensation of crossing into the dream city. Any attempt to anchor herself failed. A crushing force drew her to the archway, its glyphs radiating malevolent invitation. She passed through without hesitation. Inside that nightmarish dimension, the shadows pressed around her in living currents. She found drifting shapes that looked like torn pieces of people memories or phantom echoes of dreamers who'd come before. She heard a hiss, then recognized the elongated being from her last encounter. It stood amid swirling debris, enormous and mesmerizing. Though terror flared in her chest, she forced herself forward, calling out for her mother. The entity's body convulsed, shifting to reveal faces embedded within its mass. One of them was heartbreakingly familiar, the woman who had disappeared so many years ago. Rowan tried to speak, but her words tangled. Her mother's eyes flicked open and the creature sighed, silently pleading. The sight nearly broke Rowan. She realized this realm consumed consciousness itself, using it to build something beyond human comprehension. Back in the lab, Carter watched the EEG readout spike. Strange glyphs flashed on the computer screens. Alarms blared, but he couldn't override the chamber's locks. Lights flickered, replaced by stuttering darkness. Even from behind the safety glass, he sensed something crossing over. Down the corridor, the silhouette of a monstrous shape glimmered, trailing flickers of black. A raspy whisper called his name, though no one stood there. He hammered desperately on the control panel, sweat trickling down his face, determined to cut power to the sedation system and jolt Rowan awake. Time slipped away in disjointed fragments. With a final, frantic sequence of keystrokes, he triggered the emergency shutdown. The hiss of vents starved the chamber of power. The hum in the lab died. As sedation wore off, Rowan's eyes wrenched open. She groaned, convulsing as if something still clung to her. Then, in a cataclysmic moment, a wave of unseen energy burst outward. Sparks flew from every console. The windows shattered. Carter shielded his face. The swirling presence he'd sensed in the corridor screeched, then evaporated into nothing. Through the haze, he saw Rowan slump forward, coughing weakly. He rushed to her side. Her eyes flashed with a strange light, almost as though they were reflecting that other dimension. A moment later, the light faded, leaving her exhausted. For one wrenchingly long instant, Carter thought the threat was gone. Yet, a subtle chill in the air hinted that some part of that realm had clung to her, melded with her psyche in ways nobody could unravel. He lifted Rowan, who trembled violently. The lab was unrecognizable, cables strewn everywhere, glass shards crunching underfoot, all instruments ruined. Emergency lamps bathed the scene in a sickly yellow glow. Carter managed to pry open the door and carry her out. In the hallway, the swirling shapes had vanished, and the oppressive gloom diminished as they moved away from the destroyed chamber. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes still watched from hidden corners. Once in his car, Carter drove Rowan to the nearest hospital. Along the way, she drifted in and out of delirium, whispering apology after apology, whispering apology after apology. He gripped the steering wheel, torn between relief that she was alive and dread about what might have followed them back. In the aftermath, doctors explained that Rowan had suffered an extreme psychotic break from sleep deprivation and chemical imbalance, her mind hijacked by the illusions she'd created. Carter, however, knew better. He'd witnessed the illusions bleed through into reality, flickering shapes, swirling shadows, unstoppable surges of energy. As Rowan lay sedated in a hospital room, monitors beeping steadily, he held vigil at her bedside. Sometimes her eyes fluttered open, only to roll back as she murmured about glyphs and arches. Late one night, she jolted awake and spoke with lucid intensity. "I saw her," she said. "She's still out there." Then she sank back into a haunted silence. Whatever part of her mother remained in that twisted place was no longer something they could foresee returning to the waking world. During Rowan's final days in the hospital, Carter came to see her less as a brilliant scientist and more as a shattered soul who glimpsed cosmic horrors. She was polite enough with the staff, responding to therapy questions with vague answers about nightmares and illusions. Yet sometimes her eyes glazed over, as though she were staring through invisible walls. Shadows in the corners of her room seemed to ripple. Nurses complained about the lights flickering whenever they approached her bed. At the edge of Carter's mind lurked the horrifying thought that any route back to that dimension might still be open, waiting for the right convergence of mental fragility. He worried Rowan could be pulled in again, or worse, that something else might slip through into their world. Discharged to continue outpatient therapy, Rowan emerged thinner and more subdued. She clung to Carter's arm as they left the building, the daylight seeming to hurt her eyes. Though her obsession with the dream city had quieted, it had not disappeared. Each night she suffered abrupt awakenings, cold sweat drenching her sheets, a silent scream dying on her lips. She confessed to Carter that she felt a lingering presence in her dreams, an echo from that realm. Sometimes she perceived her mother's touch, gentle yet distant, urging her to let go. Other times she caught glimpses of the many-eyed creature, its twisted silhouette casting a net of nightmares inside her skull. She had opened a door, and even if it was forced mostly shut, the cracks still bled glimpses of that forbidden place. Time blurred as they tried to reclaim fragments of normalcy. The lab was sealed off, its damage so extensive that the Oversight Committee demanded an investigation. Meanwhile, Rowan gave away her equipment. She expressed no interest in continuing the experiments, but kept her mother's diaries hidden away in a locked drawer. Carter never pressed her about them, sensing she needed space to heal. Months slipped by, and there were even days when she smiled at something unrelated to her research, or drank coffee for the simple pleasure of warmth. Yet the nightmares persisted. An invitation she refused to accept again. She prayed it would stay that way. One autumn evening, Carter stopped by her apartment to check on her. He found her staring out the window, gazing at the glowing city lights in the distance. A streak of insomnia etched dark circles under her eyes, but she managed a faint smile. They spoke about everyday matters, weather, music, steering clear of the horrors that lingered between them. Then lightning flashed outside, illuminating Rowan's face in an eerie glow. For an instant, Carter was almost certain he saw something shift in her expression, an echo of the entity's many eyes peering back. But the moment passed, leaving him wondering if exhaustion had conjured illusions of his own. Rowan blinked, returned his worried look with one of her own, and turned away to brew tea. Neither spoke of it, and that silence said everything. Long after Carter left, Rowan sat alone, the mug in her hands growing cold. She closed her eyes and exhaled shakily, feeling that half-remembered swirl lurking behind her eyelids. She recalled the twisting architecture and the impossible sky of that insidious city. Through it all, a single question remained unanswered. Had she truly seen her mother, or a hollow specter fashioned by that dimension's nightmares? In time, her cup emptied, leaving only the bitter dregs. She listened to the storm lash against the window, and realized, with a slow, sinking dread, that it no longer mattered whether her mother was real there or not. The door had been opened, the boundary tested. Even if she never returned to that realm, pieces of it had already seeped into her mind, and perhaps the world around her. In that final, hushed moment, Rowan set the mug down and turned off the lamp. Darkness settled over her apartment, and she felt the faintest shiver course through the air. Maybe it was a trick of lightning, or maybe it was that other dimension, breathing softly in a corner of the shadows, reminding her that once you've crossed the portal to the unknown, you are never truly alone again. And as sleep draped across her like a wary caretaker, she couldn't help but wonder whether she would dream of that archway once more, and who or what would be waiting if she did.